March 14th, 1944. 6:47 hours. 3 kilometers west of Kalinkovichi, the Russian SSR. Temperature, minus 18 degrees Celsius. The snow crust cracked under Private Alexei Petrov's weight like breaking bones. Not the clean snap of dry timber, something wetter, more final. He lay prone behind a fallen birch, its bark blackened by artillery fire. His Mosin-Nagant 91/30ths cradled in arms, gone numb an hour ago. The Pew scope's lens cap dangled from its leather thong, tapping against the wooden stock in rhythm with his heartbeat. Tap, tap, abba, metronome counting down seconds he didn't have. Through the 3.5x magnification, the German forward observation host resolved into sharp relief. 2 men in winter camouflage, one with binoculars, the other sketching on a map board, their breath plumed white in the pre-dawn gloom. Between Alexei and them lay 300 meters of open field, white and innocent as a fresh shroud. The snow here was undisturbed. That should have been his first warning. Hold position, Sergeant Brykanenko had whispered 12 hours earlier, his breath reeking of ration bread and fear. The 127th Rifle Division's pushing from the north. We spot for artillery, then we pull back, but the 127th hadn't come. The artillery hadn't fired. And now the Germans were mapping fallback positions, which meant they knew something Alexei's superiors didn't. The boy, because at 16, despite the rifle and the 3 confirmed kills marked on his stock in tiny notches, he was still a boy, felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear, something colder. Responsibility. His spotter, Private Morozov, lay 3 meters to his right, also 17, also convinced his mother's prayers would bring him home. Morozov's breathing had changed 2 minutes ago, shallow, rapid. Alexei didn't need to see his face to know the eyes were wide, white-rimmed. Steady, Alexei breathed, his words freezing instantly. Just the observer and his mapman. We take them, we break their eyes, then we crawl back. He didn't hear the Schützenmine 42. None of them ever did. The German anti-personnel mine lay buried beneath 6 centimeters of ice and snow, its pressure plate sensitive to 7 kilograms of pressure. Alexei's right knee, as he shifted for a better angle, exerted 9. The detonation wasn't loud. It was a crumpa sound like a door slamming in an empty house. White fire and frozen earth erupted beneath him. His right leg vanished in a red mist. His left leg caught in the secondary blast of another mine, triggered by the first disappeared mid-thigh. For 3 seconds, Alexei felt nothing. He was floating above the field, watching a body that looked like his own perform a grotesque pirouette. Then the pain hit. Not pain. Pain was too small a word. This was a universe of white-hot iron, of nerves screaming in languages he didn't know. The shock wave had thrown him backward, but his hands, miraculously, cruelly intact, still clutched the Mosin-Nagant. Morozov was screaming. The Germans were shouting. A flare arced into the sky, painting everything magnesium white. Alexei looked down at where his legs should be. Saw red spreading across the snow like ink on blotting paper. Saw the shattered bones, the shredded fabric of his telegreka, the steam rising from his own flesh into the sub-zero air. His first coherent thought was, the rifle is still clean. His second, I have 8 rounds in the magazine. The German observer was pointing. The mapman had dropped his board and was reaching for his Mauser. They were 300 meters away, an impossible shot for most men. But Alexei Petrov had been trained by Sergeant Maxim Bryksin himself, the same Bryksin who taught Vasily Zaitsev before Stalingrad. He knew the Mosin's trigger pulled 2 kilograms, crisp. He knew the 7.62 by 54 mmR's drop at 300 meters 9 centimeters. He knew the wind, barely a whisper from the east, would drift his bullet 2 centimeters left. What he didn't know was whether a boy with no legs could still kill. The flare began its descent. In its dying light, Alexei Petrov did the impossible. He rolled onto his stomach. He tucked the Mosin's butt into his shoulder. He sighted through the pew scope, his world now a small circle of German faces, growing larger as they advanced to investigate. His finger, gloveless and white with cold, found the trigger. The trigger broke like a dry twig. 2 kilograms of pressure, exactly as Sergeant Brixen had taught him. The 7.6 2x5 4 cartridge ignited with a hiss crack that Helen She felt more than heard, the concussion hammering through his collarbone, his teeth clicking together. Through the pew scope, the German observer's face dissolved into a red halo. The Obergefreiter's binoculars flew backward, one lens shattering against the snow. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The mapman, just a soldat, maybe 19, with pimples visible even at 300 meters, stood frozen. His mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. Alexei worked the bolt. Lift the handle 90 degrees. Pull back. The empty brass case tumbled end over end, steaming in the cold air. Push forward. Lock down. The metallic shunk of the action was louder than the shot had been. The soldat dropped his map board and reached for his carabiner 9.8K. Too slow. Alexei's second round took him high in the chest, left of the breastbone. The German spun, his arms windmilling, and fell across his officer's legs. 2 down. Morozov had stopped screaming. Alexei heard him instead retching, the wet splatter of vomit on snow. The smell of cordite and blood and bowels hit Alexei's nostrils. His own bowels had voided when the mine detonated. He didn't care. The shame of that would come later, if there was a later. Through the scope, he scanned the German position. No movement. The observation post was just a shallow scrape in the earth, a tarpaulin roofed with branches. The 2 bodies steamed like fresh meat on a butcher's block. Alexei's hands were steady. Shock and blood loss should have made them tremble, but they weren't his hands anymore. They belonged to the rifle. Morozov, he whispered. Morozov, the flare. No answer. Just more retching. Alexei risked a glance. His spotter lay curled in a ball, hands over his ears, rocking. The boy's rifle lay forgotten in the snow. Useless, but the flare pistol looped pistol was still in Morozov's webbing. Alexei needed it. Not for signaling, for burning. He began to crawl. The pain was a separate entity now, a living thing that inhabited his lower body. It breathed with him, pulsed with his heartbeat. Every drag forward sent fresh waves through the stumps. The left was worse mid-thigh, the femur splintered, the muscle sheared clean by the blast. The right ended at the knee, a ragged mess of fabric and bone. He left 2 red trails behind him, bright as ski tracks on fresh snow. The Germans would have heard. Mines don't detonate silently. They'd send a patrol, 10 minutes, maybe 15. Alexei had that long. His fingers found Morozov's boot. Give me the flare gun. Morozov's eyes were glassy, unfocused. I can't move. Then I'll take it. Alexei fumbled with the leather flap. His fingers were wooden, clumsy. He found the cold metal of the looped pistol, pulled it free. It was a German model, taken from a dead Feldgendarme 2 weeks ago. He checked the breech. 1 cartridge. Red flare. Good. He dragged himself back to his firing position. The snow was soaking through his telegreka at the chest. His body was shutting down, prioritizing core temperature over extremities. Extremities he no longer had. The irony would have made him laugh, if laughing wouldn't have killed him. Through the scope again. Movement. 3 figures, low and fast, using the dead observer's scrape for cover. They'd come from the west, from the tree line. A grub squad. One with a machine pistol, the others with rifles. They were shouting in German, their words distorted by distance, and the ringing in Alexei's ears. Second move forward. Second platoon. Advancing. Alexei's world narrowed to the scope's circle. The machine pistoler was the danger. MP-40. Effective to 200 meters. At 300, he could still get lucky. Alexei's third round took him in the throat as he rose to fire a burst. The 7.62 millimeters bullet tumbled through flesh and vertebrae. The German's head snapped back, his finger clenching the trigger. The MP-40 chattered skyward, a dozen rounds tracing useless arcs into the dawn. The other two dropped flat, smart, but they were conscripts, probably fresh from the work rise in Bavaria. They'd been taught to hug the earth when shot at. They hadn't been taught that a good sniper waits for you to crawl. Alexei worked the bolt. Shunk, shunk. 4 rounds left in the magazine. He'd fired 3. No, he'd fired 3. He was losing count. Shock was stealing his mind. He had to focus. The first soldat tried to crawl left, toward a frozen stream bed. Alexei let him move. Let him think he had cover. The boy, he was a boy, same age as Alexei reached the stream's edge, began to slide down the bank. Alexei's 4th round caught him in the small of the back. The bullet severed the spine. The German lay twitching in the ice, his legs useless. Like Alestes, the last man ran. Just stood and ran, back toward the trees. Alexei's 5th round missed. The recoil had shifted his position. He was sliding down the shallow slope, his blood-slicked stumps giving him no purchase. He wrestled himself back up, worked the bolt. Shunk, shunk. The German was 70 meters away now, running in a straight line. Panic does that. Sergeant Brixen had said, "A running man is a dead man. Just lead him a little." Alexei led him by a body's width. The 6th round caught the soldat between the shoulder blades. He pitched forward, face first into the snow, his legs kicking spasmodically. 6 down. 6 Germans. 6 mothers who would get the Kriegsmarine telegram. Alexei's vision grayed at the edges. He checked the rifle's magazine. 2 rounds left. He had 2 more in his pouch, but loading them would require hands that weren't frozen, a mind that wasn't fading. He'd saved the last 2 for himself. That was the sniper's code, never be taken. The SS had a special interest in snipers. They'd peel your skin off in strips, make you talk about your unit's positions. Alexei had seen what they'd done to Sergeant Brixen's body after they caught him near Vitebsk, but the flare. He still had the flare. Through the scope, he saw more movement. Not infantry, a vehicle. An SD KFZ 251 half-track, crawling along the tree line. Its commander stood in the hatch, binoculars raised. They'd heard the shots, tracked the position. Now they'd come to collect. Alexei tucked the flare pistol under his chin. The metal was ice cold against his throat. He could end it now. One pull of the trigger, and the red phosphorus would burn through his brainstem. Quick, certain. But the half-track was stopping. The commander was pointing. Not at Alexei's position, at something to the east. Alexei shifted the scope. Saw what the German saw. A Soviet T-34, hull down behind a berm. Then another, and another. A whole platoon, advancing in line abreast, their engines throwing black diesel smoke into the morning air. The 127th Rifle Division had finally arrived. Or maybe it was the 120th, or the 45th Guards. It didn't matter. They were Soviet tanks, and they were here. The half-track's commander dropped into his vehicle. The engine revved. They were retreating. Alexei lowered the flare pistol. He looked at his stumps, at the 6 German bodies in the snow, at the Mosin-Nagant, its stock splattered with his blood, but its action still smooth, still perfect. He began to laugh. It started as a chuckle and became something else, something wild and broken. He laughed until the gray at the edges of his vision became black, until the cold wasn't cold anymore but warm. So warm, like his mother's kitchen in Leningrad before the war. The last thing he saw was a red star painted on the lead tank's hull. The last thing he heard was Morozov's voice, very far away, screaming, "Medic! Medic! For the love of God, a medic!" Then nothing. The smell of chloroform and gangrene. That's what consciousness brought him first, not pain, but the stench of the 3rd Belarusian Front's 47th Evacuation Hospital. Alexei had been here before, twice. Once for a bullet graze that had taken a crescent of flesh from his left shoulder. Once for frostbite that had turned 3 of his toes black. Both times he'd walked out. This time he couldn't feel his legs. He opened his eyes to canvas. The hospital tent was a standard palatka 15 meters long, windows cut into the walls, inner cloth partitions turning it into a maze of suffering. Lanterns hung from the ridgepole, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. A nurse in a blood-stained apron moved between cots, her feet silent on the frozen dirt floor. She was young, maybe 20, with a kerchief tied peasant style over her hair. Her eyes were old. "You're awake, not a question." She pressed fingers to his wrist, counting. "Pulse is thready. You've lost a lot of blood." Alexei tried to speak. His tongue was wool, his throat full of rust. "Water." She held a tin cup to his lips. The water was lukewarm, metallic. "Small sips. Your stomach won't take more." He drank, then coughed. The movement sent fire through his lower body. He looked down. The cot ended too soon. Under the rough wool blanket, where his legs should have made 2 distinct ridges, there was only flatness. Bandages, thick and white, wrapped stumps that ended just below his hips. The left was bulkier. The surgeons had taken it higher, the femur's jagged end requiring more tissue to close. "How long?" he managed. 3 days. She checked a chart hanging from the cot's foot. "You were unconscious when the tankers brought you in. They said you killed 6 Germans after stepping on a mine. Is that true?" 6. He remembered 7. The observer, the mapman, the machine pistoler, the 2 crawlers, the runner. That was 6. But there had been another yes, the one by the stream. 7. Or had he dreamed that one? Shock played tricks with memory. "Where's Morozov, my spotter? The boy who brought you in?" "He's in the psychiatric ward. They say he doesn't speak anymore. Just rocks and cries." Alexei closed his eyes. Morozov had been his friend. They'd shared a foxhole, shared the last of their bread, shared stories about girls they'd never see again. Now Morozov was broken, and Alexei was legless. The war's arithmetic was simple. 7 Germans for 2 Soviet boys. A fair trade by divisional standards. A man in a political officer's uniform pushed through the canvas flap. He was thin, with a face like a hatchet and eyes that missed nothing. The gold star of the Order of the Red Banner hung from his breast. He carried a leather portfolio, the kind commissars used for important documents. Private Alexei Petrov? He didn't wait for confirmation. "I am Captain Voroshilov, Special Department. I need your statement. While you were unconscious, we verified the bodies. 6 Germans, as the nurse said. 1 Obergefreiter, 1 soldat with map-making equipment, 1 machine gunner with an MP-43 rifleman. All killed with single shots from approximately 300 meters. While you had no legs?" He said it flatly, like a report. No awe, no gratitude. Just facts to be filed. "The 7th, Alexei whispered. "By the stream." Voroshilov consulted his papers. "We found a body in a stream bed, shot in the spine. That makes 7. 7 confirmed kills while incapacitated." He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know what that means, Private?" Alexei didn't answer. He was watching a fly crawl across the canvas ceiling. It seemed very important. "It means we have a story." Voroshilov pulled up a stool, sat carefully, as if afraid to dirty his trousers. The First Belarusian Front is pushing toward Minsk. The men are tired. They need heroes. Not just any heroes, young heroes. Heroes who keep fighting when they should be dead. You understand? I want to see my rifle. Your rifle is being cleaned. It will be displayed. A Mosin-Nagant 91/30ths coup scope, used by a 16-year-old sniper to kill 7 Germans after losing both legs. The men will weep when they see it. I'm 17, Alexei lied. He'd been 16 when he enlisted, adding a year to avoid the mandatory labor battalions. His papers said 17. Voroshilov's papers would say the same. 17, even better. The captain opened his portfolio, produced a form. Report on acts of exceptional valor. I need details, exact positions, times, unit designations. The Germans you killed, what were they wearing? What equipment did they carry? Did you hear them speak? What did they say? Alexei told him. Everything. The observer's binoculars, the mapman's leather case, the machine pistoler's gray scarf, the soldat's pimples. He described the sound of the MP-40 firing into the sky, the way the runner's legs had kicked after the bullet severed his spine. Voroshilov wrote it all down in a neat, cramped hand. When Alexei finished, the captain had 6 pages. Good. This is very good. He stood, tucked the papers away. One more thing. The tankers who found you, Lieutenant Kamarov's crew, they say you were laughing when they arrived. Is this true? Alexei remembered the warmth, the red star on the tank's hull. I was cold. You were laughing. It's in the report. Voroshilov's smile was thin as a razor. A Soviet soldier, legless, bleeding, surrounded by the enemies he's killed, laughing at the fascists. That's the part they'll remember. That's the part that will make them fight harder. He turned to leave, then paused. The surgeons say you might live, if the gangrene doesn't take you, if you don't die of sepsis, if your heart is strong enough. Do you want to live, Private Petrov? Alexei looked at his stumps, at the nurse, who was changing a dressing on the next cot, her face impassive, at the fly still crawling. I want to kill more Germans. Voroshilov nodded, satisfied. Then you will. From a wheelchair, with a rifle between your knees, you will kill more. The First Belarusian Front needs instructors. Young men who can teach other young men to be ghosts in the snow. He pushed through the flap, his voice trailing back. Rest now. In 2 days, a photographer comes. Then a film crew. You will be famous. Alexei Petrov. You will be immortal. Alone, Alexei tried to move his legs. The right stump twitched. The left was dead. He thought about the 7th German, the one by the stream. Had he suffered? Had he lain there, paralyzed, watching the sky darken, feeling the cold seep in? Alexei hoped so. He hoped the German had lived long enough to understand that a boy with no legs had killed him. The nurse returned with a syringe. Morphine, for the pain. As the drug took him, Alexei saw not the canvas ceiling, but the frozen field. Saw the German observer's face dissolve in the scope. Saw the red star on the tank. Saw his mother's kitchen in Leningrad, the one that no longer existed, bombed to rubble in the first year of the siege. He slept. And while he slept, Captain Voroshilov's report traveled up the chain of command. Through the 47th Evacuation Hospital's commandant. Through the 3rd Belarusian Front's political department. To Moscow, to the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, where it landed on a desk already buried under similar reports, each claiming a hero, each needing verification, each representing a story the war effort required. But Alexei Petrov's story was different. 7 kills while legless. A 16-year-old 17 in the paperwork who'd laughed in the face of death. The youngest sniper to achieve such a feat since the war began. The political officers knew what they had. They knew the power of a boy who wouldn't die. They just needed him to survive long enough to receive his medal. The photographer arrived on a Lend-Lease Willie's Jeep, its engine coughing blue smoke into the morning chill. He was civilian and Iskustvo correspondent from Krasnaya Zvezda, with a Leica camera that cost more than a T-34 tank engine and fingers stained with developer fluid. His name was Gregory, no rank, just a pass signed by the front's political directorate that let him go where even colonels couldn't. Up, up, he commanded, waving away the nurse. We need him sitting. 2 orderlies lifted Alexei like a sack of grain, propping him against a pile of packs stuffed with straw. The rough fabric scratched his back. His stumps, still wrapped in dressings that needed changing twice daily, throbbed with the movement. The photographer didn't notice. He was already pacing, squinting through his viewfinder, muttering about composition and Svet. The rifle, he called to his assistant, a boy with a shaved head and a nervous tic. Bring the rifle. They'd cleaned it. Alexei could smell the kerosene from across the tent. The Mosin-Nagant gleamed, its pew scope polished to a mirror sheen, the stock's bloodstains scrubbed away. They'd even oiled the bolt. When the assistant placed it across Alexei's lap, the wood was warm from the sun, almost alive. Good, good. Now the medals. But Alexei had no medals. Not yet. The photographer frowned, consulted a clipboard. Captain Voroshilov said there would be medals. The Order of Lenin, at minimum. The Gold Star, if Moscow approves. The captain promised many things, Alexei said. His voice was stronger now, 3 days of broth and morphine giving it weight. The photographer ignored him, arranging the rifle just so, tilting the scope to catch the light. Look at the camera. No past it. Look at the future. Look at the victory. Alexei looked past the lens, through the tent's open flat, at the hospital yard where amputees learned to walk on crutches. A man with one leg practiced pivoting, his face contorted with effort. Another fell, was helped up by a comrade with no arms. They were the war's byproducts, broken tools that couldn't be fixed. The photographer wasn't here for them. He was here for the story. Smile. Alexei didn't smile. He stared into the lens with the same expression he'd worn in the snow. Empty, focused, already dead. The Leica clicked. The photographer moved closer, shot the rifle's detail, the scope, Alexei's hands, still perfect, still capable, gripping the stock. Then the stumps. He photographed those too, the bandages white, as surrender flags against the gray wool blanket. Tomorrow, the film crew, Gregory announced, packing his equipment. Moscow wants moving pictures. They'll bring a wheelchair. We'll have you wheeling through the ward, encouraging the other patients. Then maybe some target practice. Can you still shoot? Alexei's fingers tightened on the rifle. Give me bullets and I'll show you. The photographer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Spoken like a true hero. That night, the fever came. Not the slow burn of infection they'd warned him about, but a sudden inferno. Alexei thrashed in his cot, seeing the field again, but different. In the dream, he had legs. He ran across the snow, the Mosin light as a toy. But the faster he ran, the further the Germans retreated. Always 300 meters away. Always just out of reach. He fired and fired, but the bolt was jammed. The cartridges stuck in the magazine. The Germans turned, pointed, laughed. Their laughter was the worst sound he'd ever heard. He woke screaming. The nurse came running, her apron flapping. She pressed a cold compress to his forehead, murmured soothing words. But Alexei wasn't soothed. He was angry. Angry at the Germans for laying the mines. Angry at Morozov for breaking. Angry at Voroshilov for turning his private horror into public theater. Most of all, angry at his own body for betraying him. Morphine, he gasped. No more morphine. Not until morning. Doctor's orders. He lay back, panting. The tent was dark. The lanterns turned low. In the shadows, he could hear the other patients. A man weeping softly, another calling for his mother, in a language Alexei didn't recognize. The war had gathered them here, this collection of broken boys, and the war would forget them as soon as they were useful. The next morning, the film crew arrived in a truck that had once carried Katyusha rockets. Now it carried lights, a hand-cranked camera, and a director named Sergei, who wore a leather coat despite the cold and spoke in exclamation points. "Comrade Petrov, the people demand to see you." They'd brought the wheelchair, captured German model, its leather seat cracked, but its wheels true. They lifted Alexei into it. The sensation was bizarre. His weight distributed differently. He felt like a child in a high chair. They pushed him through the ward, past rows of cots where men with missing limbs watched with hollow eyes. Sergei directed him to stop beside a patient with both arms gone. "Tell him," Sergei whispered, "that his sacrifice is not in vain, that the motherland remembers." Alexei looked at the man. He was maybe 25, his face half covered by bandages where shrapnel had taken his jaw. He couldn't speak, couldn't even nod properly. Alexei reached out, his hands still worked, his damned perfect hands, and placed one on the man's shoulder. "The 127th is pushing forward," Alexei said, his voice carrying. "They took Kalinkovichi yesterday. The Germans are running. Every shot we fired, every drop of blood, we made them run." It wasn't true. The 127th had taken Kalinkovichi 2 days ago, but the Germans weren't running. They were regrouping. But the camera cranked, the film spooling through its gate, and Sergei nodded approvingly. The armless man made a sound, a kind of moan that might have been agreement or just pain. They filmed for 6 hours. Alexei wheeling through the snow, his rifle across his lap. Alexei cleaning the Mosin, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Alexei staring into the distance, his expression carefully blank. They brought in a German helmet, placed it on a post. Alexei shot it from 50 meters, one-handed, the wheelchair stable on frozen ground. The bullet punched through the steel with a satisfying ping. The camera captured it all. "Perfect," Sergei cried. "The boy who cannot walk, but can still kill." That evening, Captain Voroshilov returned. He brought a wooden box, small, lacquered black. Inside, on red velvet, lay the gold star of the hero of the Soviet Union. It caught the lantern light and held it, a tiny sun. "Moscow approved," Voroshilov said simply. "The ceremony is in 3 days. General Rokossovsky himself will present it. Then you go to the sniper school at Vishniaki to teach." Alexei touched the metal. It was heavier than he'd imagined. Real gold, not brass. The star's rays were sharp enough to cut. "And my legs?" "You won't need legs to teach. You'll teach them to shoot from any position. From the snow, from the mud, from a wheelchair, if they must." Voroshilov closed the box, placed it in Alexei's lap. "You are no longer Private Petrov. You are Instructor Petrov, hero of the Soviet Union. Your kill count is now 12. Alexei's head snapped up. 12? I killed 7. The half-track crew. 4 men. They were found 2 kilometers west, shot through their viewports. The official report says you killed them before the mines took your legs." Voroshilov's smile was a thin line. 12 sounds better than 7. 12 is a dozen fascists. 12 is a number for posters. I didn't kill any half-track crew. You did. It's in the report, signed by me. Witnessed by Lieutenant Komarov. Voroshilov leaned close, his voice dropping. "The truth is what the war needs it to be, Alexei. You killed 12 Germans. You laughed while doing it. You are a hero. Never forget that." He left. Alexei sat in the wheelchair, the gold star box in his lap, his rifle across his knees. 12 kills. 7 he remembered. 5 he didn't. But the medal was real. The wheelchair was real. The camera had captured his face, his hands, his stumps. The film would be processed in Moscow, printed in Pravda, shown in newsreels before the feature film. Millions would see him. Millions would believe. He opened the box again, lifted the metal. It was cold. He thought about the half-track crew, the 4 men he hadn't killed. Were they real? Were they somewhere west of here, alive, telling their own stories? Or were they dead, their bodies claimed by some other sniper's tally, their deaths now his? The nurse found him an hour later, still holding the metal, still staring at nothing. "Time for your dressing change," she said gently. "And then sleep. Tomorrow, the general." Alexei let her wheel him back to his cot. As she unwrapped the bandages, he looked down at his stumps. The right was healing clean, pink skin already forming over the bone. The left was angry red, weeping fluid, the beginning of infection, or the beginning of rejection. His body was deciding whether to live or die. "Will I walk again?" he asked. The nurse's hands paused. "There are prosthetics. From America. Lend-Lease. But they're for officers, mostly. For heroes." She glanced at the metal box. "Maybe for you. Maybe." The word hung in the air like a flare. Maybe he'd walk. Maybe he'd teach. Maybe he'd live long enough to see the war end. Or maybe the infection would climb his veins, reach his heart, and he'd die here, in this tent, another name on a wooden cross in the hospital's graveyard. That night, he didn't dream of running. He dreamed of the rifle, of its weight, its balance, the way it became part of him when he sighted. He dreamed of the scope's small circle, the world reduced to a target. In the dream, he had no legs, no body, just the rifle and the target, and the perfect, endless moment before the trigger broke. When he woke, the metal was still in his hand. The infection was still in his leg. The war was still outside, grinding men into paste. But in 3 days, General Rokossovsky would pin the gold star to his tunic, and Alexei Petrov, age 17, would become the youngest hero of the Soviet Union to survive his own legend. The question was, what do you do with a hero who can no longer run? The ceremony took place in what had once been a German officers' club in liberated Kalinkovichi. The walls still bore faint outlines where swastikas had been hastily painted over with red stars. The air smelled of diesel fuel from the generators and cheap tobacco from the soldiers packed into the room. Alexei sat in his wheelchair at the front, the Mosin-Nagant across his lap, the gold star box clutched in his hands. He wore a new tunic, wool so fresh it itched, with his sergeant's stripes sewn on by a quartermaster's assistant that morning. The stripes were of fiction, like the half-track crew. He'd been a private when the mine took his legs. Now he was a sergeant, because heroes needed to be sergeants. General Konstantin Rokossovsky entered with no fanfare. Just a man in a simple greatcoat, his face seemed like old leather, his eyes the color of winter steel. He'd commanded at Stalingrad, at Kursk, at 100 battles where men died in numbers too large to comprehend. He'd seen every kind of hero, every variety of courage. When he looked at Alexei, his expression gave away nothing. "Comrade Petrov." His voice was quiet, but the room fell silent to hear it. "Stand if you can." The order was a test. Alexei's hands tightened on the wheelchair's arms. His stumps still bandaged, still weeping sent lightning through his body as he tried to push up. Nothing happened. He remained seated, his face burning with shame. "I cannot, Comrade General." "Good." Rokossovsky stepped closer. "A man who knows his limits is more valuable than one who doesn't. The Germans have plenty of the second kind. We need the first." He took the metal box from Alexei's lap, opened it. The gold star caught the overhead lights, casting reflections on the ceiling. The general pinned it to Alexei's tunic, his fingers working with surprising gentleness. The metal was heavier than Alexei remembered. It pulled the fabric down, a weight that had nothing to do with metal. "For exceptional valor in the face of the enemy," Rokossovsky recited. for killing 12 fascist invaders while grievously wounded, for inspiring the soldiers of the First Belarusian Front to greater feats of heroism. The words were rote, spoken 1,000 times before. But when Rokossovsky leaned close to adjust the medal's ribbon, his voice dropped to a whisper only Alexei could hear. "The truth is between us, Sergeant. The truth and the dead. Remember them, not the number." Then he straightened, saluted, and the room erupted. Soldiers cheered, their voices raw. Political officers clapped with measured precision. Camera bulbs flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. The general and the legless boy, the medal gleaming between them. A photograph would appear in Pravda 3 days later, above the fold. It would be reprinted in Izvestia, in Krasnaya Zvezda, in newspapers across the Allied world. The caption would read, "Hero of the Soviet Union, Sergeant Alexei Petrov, who killed 12 Germans after losing both legs, inspires the next generation of defenders." What it wouldn't show was Alexei's face after the ceremony, when the crowd dispersed and he was wheeled back to the hospital tent. It wouldn't capture the moment he tore the medal from his tunic, held it in his palm, and considered throwing it into the frozen mud. It wouldn't record his conversation with the nurse, who found him staring at the gold star with an expression she'd seen before on men who'd lost more than limbs. "Does it help?" she asked, changing his dressings. The left stump was worse, the infection climbing despite the sulfa drugs. The medal. "Does it make it better?" Alexei turned the star over, ran his thumb across the engraving on the reverse. "Hero of the Soviet Union. No, 1104. He was the 1,104th person to receive it. How many of the others had lived to feel its weight?" "It makes it heavier," he said. 2 weeks later, they moved him to the sniper school at Vishniaki, outside Moscow. The journey took 3 days by train, in a boxcar fitted with bunks for the wounded. He shared the space with 3 other amputees. A tanker who'd lost his legs to a Panzerfaust, a pilot whose right arm ended in a stump, a machine gunner with no eyes. They didn't speak much. Each man carried his own version of Alexei's field, his own moment when the world had narrowed to pain and the decision to keep fighting anyway. Vishniaki was a converted estate, its manor house now barracks, its stables transformed into classrooms. The sniper school had produced legends, Zaitsev, Pavlichenko, Sidorenko. Now it would produce more, taught by a boy who couldn't walk. The commandant, a colonel named Orlov, with a prosthetic hand that clicked when he saluted, met Alexei at the gate. "We've been expecting you, Sergeant." "Your reputation precedes you." "My reputation is a lie. All reputations are lies. The truth is too complicated for posters." Orlov led him to a range where new recruits boys of 16, 17, 18 were practicing with Mosin-Nagants. They wore the same telegrake as Alexei had worn, the same fur-lined boots. They had the same hollow cheeks, the same desperate eyes. "These are your students," Orlov said. "Teach them to be ghosts." The first lesson was the hardest. Alexei sat in his wheelchair at the head of the classroom, a chalkboard behind him. His rifle propped beside him. The students stared, not at his face, but at the blanket covering his stumps. They were wondering if it was true, if a legless boy had really killed 12 Germans, if they could do the same. "My name is Sergeant Alexei Petrov," he began. His voice was steady. "I am a sniper. I have killed 12 men. I have killed them from 300 meters, from 200, from 50. I have killed them lying down, sitting up, and from a wheelchair. You will learn to do the same." A boy in the front row raised his hand. He had freckles and the look of someone who'd been hungry his whole life. "Comrade Sergeant, how do you... I mean, without legs, how do you stabilize the shot?" Alexei lifted the Mosin, worked the bolt. Shunk shunk, the sound made the boys sit straighter. "You don't need legs to be stable. You need a heartbeat that doesn't race. You need hands that don't shake. You need to forget that you're alive, so you can remember that they are not. He taught them the mathematics of death. Wind speed and bullet drop. How to read heat shimmer. How to use shadows. How to wait. Always how to wait. A sniper is patience with a rifle, he said. You are not a soldier. You are a clock, counting down someone else's time. They practiced with diopters training rifles that fired small pellets before graduating to live ammunition. Alexei wheeled up and down the line, correcting stances, adjusting grips. He couldn't demonstrate prone position, but he could describe it, could make them feel the snow's cold, the rifle's weight, the moment when breath stops and the world holds still. One boy, Dmitri, had trouble with the trigger pull. He jerked it, sending his shots wide. Alexei watched him for an hour, then called him over. Your problem is fear, Alexei said. You're afraid of the recoil, afraid of the noise, afraid of what happens when you kill a man. Dmitri nodded, his face red. My brother died at Kursk. I want to make them pay. Revenge makes you sloppy. It makes you pull the trigger too soon. You don't shoot for revenge. You shoot because it's your job. Alexei lifted his rifle, sighted at a target 200 meters away. Watch, he fired. The bullet punched through the target's center. He worked the bolt, fired again. Another perfect hit. The boys watched, silent. They'd heard the stories, seen the posters. But seeing the legless boy shoot better than any of them made it real. How many have you killed? Dmitri asked, his voice small. Alexei lowered the rifle. Enough that I don't remember their faces. Not enough that the war is over. That night, alone in the room they'd given him, a small space in the mater's attic, accessible only by a ramp built by the cadets, Alexei cleaned his Mosin. The action was smooth, the barrel bright. He'd fired 300 rounds that day, teaching. His shoulder was bruised, his hands cramped, but his mind was quiet. For the first time since the mine, he felt something other than pain or anger. He felt purpose. The war would end. The Germans would be driven back, would surrender, would be defeated. Numbers would be tallied. 20 million Soviet dead, 6 million German. The cities would be rebuilt, the graves marked, the medals polished and displayed in museums. Boys like Dmitri would grow old, would tell their grandchildren about the sniper school at Vishniaki, about the legless instructor who taught them to kill. And Alexei Petrov would be there in the stories. Not as he was scared, bleeding, laughing in the snow, but as they needed him to be. A hero, a ghost, a boy who wouldn't die. He pinned the gold star to his tunic, felt its weight settle over his heart. Outside, Moscow's winter wind howled against the windows. Inside, the rifle was clean. The lesson plans were written. The students were sleeping. Tomorrow, he would teach them again. Tomorrow, he would add to the legend, one perfect shot at a time. The truth was between him and the dead. The rest was just the war, doing what the war always did, making survivors into symbols, making symbols into weapons, making weapons out of boys who'd once had legs.